The unexpected fall of Bashar al-Assad has prompted a very public reappraisal of Britain's approach to the Middle East. In particular, Ed Miliband's decision to vote against Western intervention against Assad in 2013 has been criticised, including by Piers Morgan, speaking here on Question Time.
He could have gone in 2013 if Labour had got their act together and not voted against military action that David Cameron, the Prime Minister, wanted to take. And by Labour voting that down under Ed Miliband's leadership, Barack Obama then bottled it. And out of that came Russia siding with Assad. And out of that came all the mayhem, not just in loss of life and appalling scenes in Syria, but the enormous numbers of people who then left Syria and migrated across Europe, causing all sorts of problems in all sorts of countries, not least for the poor people that were being displaced. So it was carnage which we could have stopped as a country, I think, back in 2013. And Ed Miliband's been very quiet about what he did back then.
So he's speaking, of course, of an enormous amount of confidence there. There was carnage that we could have stopped. Now, of course, we have a lot of examples where the West did try and stop what was going on. I suppose Libya being the obvious example here. I mean, Iraq has nothing to do with this because Iraq, we made up a bunch of reasons and then went and invaded a relatively stable country. The debate in Libya and Syria were quite similar because there was a civil war and an oppressive leader. And then the debate was whether or not we should take out that oppressive leader. Now, we did it in Libya. What happened? State collapse and civil war. Ed Miliband in 2013, I think quite reasonably, thought, well, do we really want to do this again and create state collapse and, well, I suppose the civil war was already going on, wasn't it? But create state collapse and whatever could happen after that. Wes Streeting was on the panel with Piers Morgan and was asked if he agreed with Piers Morgan.
With hindsight, I think we can say, looking back on the events of 2013, that the hesitation of this country and the United States create a vacuum that Russia moved into and kept Assad in power for much longer.
So that was a mistake by Labour.
And hang on just a second. What I cannot say with certainty, and what we can't say for certainty even now that the rat has fled to Moscow to his backers, we cannot say that the back of Assad is going to lead to a better Syria yet. We don't know. It's too soon to judge. There are some encouraging signs, which range from the fact that the new regime is working with the international community to hand over chemical weapons stockpiles, right through to the utterly appalling fact that there are children who've walked out into freedom, who were born into prison, have never seen the sun, never seen the sky, never seen a tree, and that is the kind of regime they were living under. So do I think that back in 2013, had we acted, Russia would have been there and Assad would have been propped up for as long as he had? I don't think that's true. I think if the West had acted faster, Assad would have been gone. Would that have led to a better Syria than the one we've had under Assad? Let me bring everyone else in. I don't know.
I've only got 3 minutes left.
We know from our own foreign policy history, inaction is a choice, but so is action. And we've seen in other cases like Libya, where action did not lead to a better future.
This has been written up all day. So I sort of read about this story before I watched the clip. And everyone's written this up as sort of Wes Streeting lays into Ed Miliband. And I was sort of expecting to see something really, sort of very sort of Blairite in it, sort of, yes, we should have intervened in the Middle East and that would have brought about peace and democracy. In fact, after seeing the clip, it seemed more reserved than I was expecting. I mean, because basically I don't share Wes Streeting's politics at all, but what he said is that, if the West had intervened, Assad would have fallen sooner and Russia wouldn't have entered, which is quite true, really. I mean, it's uncontroversially true. The controversial part is, would it have got better or would it have got even worse? And he was admitting there that we don't know. So I didn't think he was sort of laying into Ed Miliband as much as other people have made out. Ed Miliband, of course, is able to speak for himself. And when he was asked about his decision in 2013 on Good Morning Britain on Friday morning.
You, when you were the leader of the opposition back in 2013, voted against and called for votes against military action against Syria back then. Knowing what we know now, do you regret that decision?
No, I don't. Assad was a brutal dictator and it's horrific what he was doing. We knew at the time he was a brutal dictator. The question I had on the table at the time was, do we bomb him? Now, I believe that after the war in Iraq, where hundreds of British troops died and thousands were injured, we should not commit British troops to combat unless we had a clear plan. What would it involve for Britain? what was our exit strategy and how would we achieve our war aims? And I didn't believe the proposition David Cameron put on the table met that criteria. As for whether Assad would have fallen earlier, we know that Donald Trump, when he was president in the US in 2017 and 2018, also did take action to bomb Assad, which didn't happen in 2013, and Assad didn't fall. Okay. So I neither believed it was right for Britain, nor do I actually believe it would have hastened the end of Assad.
Helena, this is all being sort of reported, as I say, as sort of a big bust-up between two cabinet members. I think it might be a bit overblown.
I agree. I think it's overblown. I watched the Question Time live on stream, and I didn't think that we were getting, massively pro-interventionist politics there from Wes Streeting at all. I thought it was answered, despite like how you don't have any ideological sympathies with Wes Streeting, neither do I. And I think he seemed pretty reasonable. What I would disagree with, though, is trying to say that it's nothing to do with things like Iraq, whereas, of course, the reasons for invading Iraq were complete nonsense in the same way that the chemical weapons threats from Assad were very real. The way in which that Saddam treated his own citizens, I think that's reasonably comparable to the way Bashar al-Assad treated his own citizens. And I absolutely disagree with interventionism in Iraq, and I would have disagreed with interventionism in Syria too, especially galling coming from somebody like Piers Morgan, who continually bangs on about how the Daily Mirror, when I was the editor, we opposed the war in Iraq. Well, do you like interventionism or do you not like interventionism, Piers? Please make up your mind on this. And I think the point about Libya rings very, very true in terms of how we deposing pretty totalitarian, pretty awful regimes leaves power vacuums when we try and do it ourselves. I think at least the one thing that, despite my gigantic amount of skepticism over people like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and definitely my skepticism towards the SNA, at least what's happened now in Syria is we've allowed Syrians themselves to make the decisions of what happens with their own countries. Whereas, of course, if we just continue to impose upon countries in the Middle East what the West wants them to do, that's not a way to be able to be geopolitically popular or to engender new governments and new regimes and new structures of authority that have the popular support of the people in Syria. And also to say that Ed Miliband was being like a coward by not trying to greenlight this stuff in Parliament. He was doing the correct thing. There was not popular support for British interventionism in Syria in 2013. There absolutely was not. What Ed Miliband was doing was respecting the will of the constituents of every single Labour Party MP, and probably plenty of people in the Conservative and Liberal Democratic parties as well, at the time, who did not support this action at all. That's how Parliament is supposed to work. You're supposed to represent the interests of your constituents. Whether that was the right choice or the wrong choice is by the by. The public didn't want it, and Parliament is supposed to represent the interests of the public. And I fully supported Ed Miliband at the time, and I still do today.
Let's look at one more potentially surprising intervention today, because the line of questioning being put to Ed Miliband that you saw on sort of Good Morning Britain and coming from Piers Morgan is that he wasn't interventionist enough when it came to Assad. Why in 2013 didn't you back David Cameron when he wanted to get Britain into another sort of military expedition in the Middle East? It seems, though, that charge might be out of step with the time. Right? These are very different moments to 10 or 20 years ago. And Robert Jenrick today had an interesting piece in The Telegraph. So Robert Jenrick, now the Shadow Justice Secretary. The headline, "Neoconservatism is dead. Good riddance." And he says a quarter century of failed foreign interventions have made the world a much more dangerous place. Now, this is the first headline I've ever seen where there's a sentence next to Robert Jenrick's face, and I agree. I don't agree with everything in the article, but it is interesting. He celebrates the fact that the West appears to be staying out of Syria, at least officially. And then he says this: "After thousands of lives lost and trillions of dollars wasted on foreign adventures, Western leaders might have finally realized good intentions do not ordain good outcomes. On Sunday, President Biden, the embodiment of extreme liberal foreign policy doctrine, limited his response to the Syria crisis to drone strikes on IS groups. When the history books are written, the fall of the Assad regime may well bookmark 2 sorry decades of expensive wars in peripheral countries that the West has emphatically lost, all while our main adversaries in Moscow and Beijing gathered strength. The consequences of these catastrophic failures have belatedly rebounded on the protagonists. During the recent presidential election, the Cheney family name proved toxic with voters for Dick's role masterminding the Iraq and Afghan wars. Trump's victory marks a complete rejection of the neoconservative clique that has dominated US foreign policy for years. The guilty men on this side of the Atlantic who prosecuted these disastrous wars continue to be rewarded by polite society. So, sorry, he's now moved on to sort of complaining that in the UK we haven't sort of dismissed the neocons in the same way that they did in America, or at least the liberal interventionists. He says Blair's chief of staff, Jonathan Powell, who helped orchestrate Britain's involvement in the Iraq war, despite Bush making very clear to Blair in 2002 that we needn't participate, has returned to Downing Street. And then he complains, Peter Mandelson, Blair's eminence gree, is tipped for the plum role of ambassador to the United States. And the man who hoodwinked the public, Alistair Campbell, has been welcomed into the bosom of the liberal elite to lecture about disinformation and standards in public life, his role justifying the Iraq war airbrushed out like a Soviet history book. Helena, I suppose this is Robert Jenrick taking his lead from Donald Trump in a way. Donald Trump sort of saying, I am standing against the bipartisan establishment who were for expensive, pointless interventions abroad. I don't think we've heard that stated in such a strident fashion from a conservative in this country. Maybe you'd sort of hear this kind of thing from Nigel Farage, but sort of from someone who's in the shadow cabinet in the Conservative Party, clearly one day wants to be the leader of the Conservative Party. Is this significant and is this welcome, I suppose?
I mean, I just had a shower before we started the show. I have another one now just to wash kind of the stench of agreeing with Robert Jenrick off me. It feels weird. It feels very strange, but he's right. He's 100% right. Especially the bit where we forget about all the things that Peter Mandelson and Alistair Campbell are responsible for, and they just appear on our TV screens. It never gets questioned. All of the liberal darlings tuning into the rest as politics. I'm like, hang on a minute, that's the dossier guy. What are you doing with it? Why are you paying attention to anything this man has to say? But regardless, I think that it is really him trying to tap into, and we saw this during the election campaign as well, him rebranding from this one nation Tory image that he had up until 2021 or so, rebranding himself into this kind of Pied Piper of Trumpian politics in the UK. It's clear specifically who he thinks he wants to appeal to and where he thinks that the future of conservatism, especially in Western countries, is going to go. And I understand why he's doing it. I think it's a grift. I don't think he's doing a lot of these things in total amount of earnest, but it's clear that this is where the direction of travel is going with right-wing politics across, especially the Anglosphere, especially in the United Kingdom and in the US, where the idea of foreign policy is totally, we don't want to spend any money. Don't want to spend any money, any time doing anything anywhere else. We're just going to sit and do America first. We're going to do Britain first, and anything else outside of that, we shouldn't be engaging in. And I have a disagreement with that kind of politics broadly, and that whilst I am firmly anti-interventionist, I do think that we should be at least assisting people who we're allies with. So, for example, if you look at Syria right now, the one thing that was stopping the Turkish-backed militias from advancing into Rojava was the presence of American troops within northeastern Syria. And as soon as they withdrew, there was a big strip of land that got taken by Turkish-backed militants in that area. And I think this is bad. We are allied with these people. And I think, Western governments having troops on the ground in Rojava to be able to protect them from all of the potential fallout of what's happening in Syria right now, I think that would be a good thing. I don't think we need to completely isolate ourselves as long as we're not doing regime changing, intervening where we aren't wanted. But broadly, I think that Robert Jenrick is right, both in the fact that neoconservatism is dead, because it is dead, both in the UK and in the United States, especially in the United States. And I also agree with him that it's good that it's gone as well, and that this aggressive interventionist policy from Western governments to impose freedom on people, the meme, essentially the Team America World Police meme, I think he's right with that. I'm just going to have to go and wash very, very, very thoroughly to be able to say those phrases on stream.
Someone pointing out in the comments, which I think is correct, which is that sort of to suggest the West haven't really got involved in Syria this time around would be overlooking the fact that Israel, which is armed to the teeth by the West, has decided to take this opportunity to occupy vast swathes of Syria and destroy their naval fleet and every kind of military sort of capacity that the state has. So that is very much true. I think if Robert Jenrick would be a braver man if he also said in his article that maybe Israel should stop destroying the army before we know who's going to take over. But obviously this is the same man who sort of goes jogging with jumpers that say, what did his jumper say? Was it F Hamas or something like that.
Well, he literally he went to, it was the Conservative conference. He was doing a whole speech wearing a Hamas are terrorists hoodie on. Yeah, and I hopefully agree with the commenters. Yeah, I mean, if we want to truly be anti-interventionist, it's not good enough to just make ourselves not do things. We have to be ensuring the people who are part of our geopolitical sphere are also not doing things, rather than just giving a carte blanche to essentially use Israel as a proxy. Right? Like, I agree with that.